Dr. Mukhisa Kituyi of Kenya became Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development on the 1st of September 2013. Immediately prior, Dr. Kituyi was Chief Executive of the Kenya Institute of Governance based in Nairobi, and he served as Kenya's Minister of Trade and Industry from 2002 to 2007. Please welcome Dr. Mukhisa Kituyi to the stage.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, may I express my appreciation to Standard Chartered for inviting and facilitating my participation here to join the rest of you in listening to some very interesting perspectives on what's happening around the continent. I should admit that a substantial part of what I want to talk about has already been given by Rosel, so that reduces the burden. But I'll take a little tour, start globally, go continental, and end up in Kenya, and I hope I'll do that in as short a moment as possible, not repeating quite a bit of what has already been presented. Tuesday last week in Bangkok, I launched globally the Digital Economy Report, our newest product, a very ambitious and exciting publication. If you go online on our website, you can download it for free, which showed a lot of things. I could talk about it for an hour, but just 2-3 things are important to put in the context of our discussion here. The first one, the exponential growth of the digital economy globally. One of the best measures of the growth of a digital economy is the speed of movement of data. And the internet protocol of traffic, the main measure for data movement globally, is the best indicator of what is happening with digitalization. And in this report we show that in the year 2000, globally, the IP traffic was 200 gigabytes per second. 200 gigabytes per second in 2000. 2018, it had reached 45,000 gigabytes per second. And with the onset of 5G, we expect in 2023, it will be 150,000 gigabytes per second. This phenomenal explosion of the data economy has 2 major characteristics that are important for the rest of global development discourse. The first one, the growing value of data as the driver of economic activity. But the second one is the growing concentration and consolidation of control of data by platform giants. In our measure of the trends in economic growth of the digital economy, just 2 years from 2015 to 2017, the digital platform giants' value grew 67% in 2 years to $17 trillion US. Can go on in that direction, but there's something else that's very important. While the rest has been of the world is consumed by the technology wars, and I like specifically to call them technology wars, not trade wars. I'm a trade person, but what's happening between America and China has more to do with technology than with trade. But in spite of those wars, China and the US account for more than 85% of the capitalization of the 70 largest digital platform companies in the world. And even among those, just a handful, 7 of them, account for 2/3 of all the digital value of the largest platform companies in the world. Third after US and China, South Korea at 3.8%. South Korea is larger than Europe combined, which is at 3.6%. Africa at 1.2%, Latin America at 0.2%. When we did this report, India was accounting for 0.7%. But then just after I went to press, Walmart purchased the largest Indian player and wiped out India's significance in this top 70 platform. So a phenomenal expansion not only of the digitalization, but also the platformization of data. is a phenomenon that impacts very, very greatly in the discourse. For the development community, what it means is this. One, all of us are voluntarily surrendering our private data, our raw data, personal information, our business models and business information, our national statistics, for free. The digital giants not only convert this into digital data, but they monetize it without any reward going back to the source. There is no sharing in the benefit of what we give for free. So the international discourse is going to be, how do we address this question? The best way to address the same question is, how do we explain the fact that 90% of the digital platform companies' tax is paid to the US government? So eventually, it goes beyond the abilities of national jurisdictions. We are all in this. It's going to be phenomenal. It's going to reshape discourse. It's going to reshape how we structure regulation, how we structure cooperation across borders, balancing between policy space at home and regional cooperation and international cooperation for fair taxation. I will not say much more about the digital economy report. Earlier this year, in the city of Barbados, I launched globally the World Investment Report 2019. Now, this has two things that are important in the discussion of where Africa is going. Number one, globally, there is declining return on investment in manufacturing. If you even look at manufacturing enterprises, value is shifting from the actual process of making value to the services sector of manufacturing. The servicization of manufacturing, as it were. That is phenomenal because it means a global FDI, which has been very reluctant to go into vulnerable economies, is going to be even more hesitant with the declining returns on manufacturing as value added. While this has been happening, something else has been happening. The massive expansion of services sector, even services as a component of manufacture, is a major, major phenomenon. A second thing that's of significance to the development community is that globally, investment in greenfield projects has migrated massively to East Asia. Last year, 149 billion US dollars, equivalent to 40% of global cross-border FDI, was in Eastern Asian economies. This has two components. One, the growing concentration of savings and investable capital in East Asia. But two, the impact of Chinese technology Cold War with the US on the relocating value chains. Let me explain that a little bit. You see, I mentioned that to me there is no major phenomenon called a trade war. See, in 1998, Bill Clinton announced a strategic shift that China had become a strategic partner to the US. The logic of it was very simple. America had seen how the construction, the emergence of a middle class had been grave diggers of communism in Eastern Europe. The assumption was, if you help chaperone China to become an open economy, you will manufacture millionaires who will be the grave diggers of communism. So America fast-tracked Chinese entry into the World Trade Organization in 2001 on very generous conditions, because you are fast-tracking the growth of capitalism in China to kill communism. Fast forward 20 years, capitalism in China has been miraculous. The largest number of millionaires in the world, the fastest growing economy in the world, the largest trading nation in the world, the factory of the world. But there's another thing. The Communist Party of China realigned itself and became stronger thanks to the capitalist growth. So the political reason for the strategy has failed. So what was supposed to be a strategic partner starts becoming a strategic threat. I say this because if it was the Cold War, you'll say that the politics of Trump, we can wait him out maybe another 2 months, 2 years, and then that will go away. The reality of the strategic shift and the failure of growth of capitalism in China to defeat Communist Party is going to be with us for a long time. Regardless of the tenant of the White House, the technology war between China and the US is with us for the medium and longer term. Two immediate consequences that are relevant to Africa. The first one, America is rewriting global value chains. Deliberate, political-driven de-investment in China for American enterprises. The immediate beneficiary right now is Vietnam. And second to Vietnam, European Union, and Canada, Mexico, particularly Mexico. The strange thing for us is that the more labor-intensive component of production in East Asia, as it gets distorted by politics, we will expect that some of that will be now to the boon for Africa. But unfortunately, it's not working because Africa has been linking to global value chains towards America via Asia. So Chinese companies which invest in Africa, if they have diminished market access, they diminish African access to global value chains. Similarly, if you look inside Africa, unlike the rest of the world, globally, local value chains across borders account for 60% of investment. In Africa, it is 6%. So the disruptions of supply chains connections to China and other Eastern Asian enterprises does not automatically lead to greater intensification of cross-border investments in Africa. I'll mention that a little bit again. I wanted to talk a bit about what are the challenges before I talk about transforming Africa. So I'll just finish the challenges with 2-3 other little things. Number one, declining return on manufacturing investment has meant one major phenomenal change, qualitative change, that FDI flows into new projects are not so much attracted by the promise of cheap labor as they are attracted by assurances of digital literacy. The quality and skill of your labor force for the digital economy is increasingly more important than the fact that you underpay your workers to attract foreign investment. And this phenomenally transforms those who are digital ready. And this is also going to cause a shift on the challenges of financing Africa's transformation. What is it we're doing wrong? What is it we're doing right? Two other challenges, and I'll now go to the prospects. One is debt. Although, on average, Africa's debt is not overwhelming, the limited policy space is making debt overhang a very significant threat for many African countries. Now, we deal with averages, but averages are very deceptive because while we say that only about 20 countries are having a debt to GDP percentage of over 50%, the reality is there are 6 African countries with a debt to GDP percentage of over 100. And just the policy space to be able to maneuver, even to access credit, even reschedule those debts is very, 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 very uncertain. Secondly, a growing debt stock to China is a new phenomenon we don't know how to deal with. Last year, I was invited to a national investment dialogue in China. And I came away with 2 major things. On the positive side, well, positive for Africa, is the realization that Chinese land and waters are 34% environmentally irredeemable. And that means that potentially China is going to look to Africa for a source of food. It is starting, it's a growth area, it's a major opportunity that has to be grown. But there was a second side that was rather depressing. I mentioned that China, as it becomes a major investor and donor country and creditor country, will have to do what all others have done, except that you'll have to write off some of your debts. The cerebral reaction to that statement was like a phenomenon politically not thought about or discussed, not internalized, that China can actually forgive debt. It may eventually have to, but the reality is, looking at the reaction at the highest level of government, in our meeting in Shenzhen, I got the sense that China is not looking at debt workout yet. I think there has to be discourse that China has to take the responsibility others have taken in sharing that we have to work out a mechanism. We have to forgive some of the debt that you gave on unsustainable conditions. Politically, certain debt is not viable to carry on public books, but this discourse is not yet sufficiently in place. Two last things there on the negative. Most of Africa's investment in global value chains is upstream segment. Therefore, the main value addition and diversification of global value chains happens outside Africa. And you are not going to grow manufacturing unless you start addressing how far downstream can we go in value addition, value creation, even cross-border investment in Africa. I think unless we can answer that question, our dream of transforming Africa and even converting our population into a dividend remains a political delusion. Intra-African trade does pose a great opportunity, which is what I'm going to talk about as an opportunity. But first, as a challenge. The mechanics of creating a treaty and signing on the treaty are academic things. We can do that even in our libraries. Some of us who have been following it from the East African community to European Union, we know how the architecture looks like. But it can only have life when there is political belief in it. The European project was possible because the two largest continental economies, Germany and France, were not only ready to do political leadership and walk the talk, but they were ready to pay for the short-term disruptions of the weaker economies in Europe. In Africa, the two largest countries signed up to the CFTA on the last day in Niamey. But even worse, in Niamey we agreed that the worst you can do is stand still on tariffs, meaning that after Niamey, no African enterprise should pay higher taxes in moving goods to another African country. Last week I was in the World Economic Forum in South Africa, and the Minister of Finance had just published a new policy increasing local content for made in South Africa, raising the barrier of intra-African trade into South Africa. But the rationale was, let us build South African jobs by what South Africa exports to the rest of Africa. There is no free lunch for South Africa in Africa. South Africa is the largest exporter into Africa. It cannot make more difficult other Africans trading into South Africa and hoping that that is a model of growth. The process of integration requires that the language of national brands is compromised by the notion that while we can, in the short term, lose some jobs, even lose some market share, in the medium and long term, we have more gain by opening up to our neighbors. I don't think that logic has been internalized very much in Africa beyond the East African community. And I think one of the challenges, those who have gone through the experience of biting the bullet, taking the risk, addressing the challenges that are resultant to greater integration, must inform the dialogue, first and foremost from the business community, next from public intellectuals, and third from more progressive politicians, that the African project stands our best chance of creating opportunities for Africa, but require short-term sacrifices and a de-escalation of nationalist rhetoric and narrow-sighted economic nationalism. On the positive side, the trade agreement I mentioned with a phenomenal potential. Phenomenal because by far the largest value-added export of Africa is into Africa. 40% of what Africa sells to Africa has value added. Only 16% of what Africa sells to the world, of the rest of the world, is value added. And that means a purposeful political engagement to address simplification of cross-border movement of goods and services, liberating the movement of labor, opening up and investing in new service industry is going to lift Africa's possibilities. But it has to be done with political attention to detail. Secondly, Africa does not invest in its digital economy. I started an initiative with Alibaba, with Jack Ma of Alibaba. We've been taking some young net entrepreneurs to Hangzhou campus to learn how to build electronic market visibility. And it's working. It's already working wonders in Rwanda. But I need political leadership to take responsibility. I need African financial services to start looking at how do we cross the border of the unknown and invest in digital startups. As bankers, you look at what is your credit history, what is your capital stock. How do you ask those questions to a tech startup? Their main stock is in their heads, and their capital is in their laptop. How do they access credit in a normal way? Abnormal times require that financial markets also start doing abnormal things to finance the next drive of Africa's growth. I want to finish off. I can see she's almost sitting at the end of her set. But just going to this region, we are living in uncertain times. One of the main things that are going to hold us, keep a positive momentum, is how we ride out short-term uncertainties. As a country, for example, Kenya is grappling with the challenge. We drove the East African integration, but we have seen a steady erosion of Kenyan market share in the East African market. Okay, it may be interesting that we're now looking at possibilities of cross-border economic zones with Ethiopia. It's good to be innovative and look at new ideas. But I think going to new battlefields without trying to diagnose and understand the reasons of failed battlefields does not represent progress. You must ask yourselves, what is it we didn't do right in the East African space that we want to correct when we go into a relationship with a country which still has an Exchange Control Act? Meaning they can take in money, but you cannot take money out without central bank permission. An area without a minimum wage law, meaning in labor-intensive manufacture, Kenya can never compete with Ethiopia. The average wage is less than 1/3 of the minimum wage in Kenya. What is the comparative advantage that Kenya brings to such a zone? Or is it a shipment of made in Ethiopia into the Kenyan market? Those are challenges that are difficult, but they must be addressed politically. What this country, I think, needs is a replenished engagement between public leaders and business leaders. An engagement which says, we have a responsibility and an opportunity. An opportunity, you have the most industrious labor force in the neighborhood. You have people who don't, on average, look to government to fix feeding for them. That they say, give me space to do it for myself. Build into that space a purposeful public action. And lastly, Africa's hopes will rise and fall on what we do with its population. In 1960, Romania and Kenya had the same level of population, 7 million people each. In 2019, Romania's population is 7 million. Kenya's is 49 million. Where do you find the miracle to supply services to the 49 million? You have increased over Romania by 42 million since 1960. And that is the whole of Africa's issue. My personal position is this: don't be pretentious. Africa cannot find a miracle and a silver bullet that can actually sustain prosperity, employment, without controlling the dynamics of human population increases. The dividend is a ruse. I think we must invest in jobs. We must find innovative ways of strengthening SMEs, which are a major engine of employment, invest in the new economy, but also we cannot sustain high population growth. Thank you for your attention.